Shabbat shalom. We're a bit smaller than normal this morning. Part of that is because over 200 people came last night, mostly for Carol. And part of it is because a significant part of the community is actually downtown at the moment for the protest that was conveniently scheduled in the middle of our davening. I'll be sure to send a note. I am so grateful that we've reached this point in the Torah. A funny thing to say, I don't know. I'm so grateful that we're at this parsha this week. But one of the things that we've been doing together over the last few weeks is exploring the Torah, not just sort of the content, but sort of the geography of the Torah's roadmap, like understanding what the real estate of the Torah is taken up by. And like I mentioned, if you were here last Shabbat, that the last number of parshas have been involved in the first communal project that we ever took on, the building of the Mishkan. And it took a lot. Remember last week I was talking about that last summation of everything that had been done in order to create this holy place. And the miracle, not just that they had done something, but that they had done it together with one heart. Given the fact that we were also going through our own process of trying to figure out where we go as a community in light of the new administration and the firings and so much of the mishigash that's affecting people left, right, and center here, right? One of the things that I think that people can relate to is that sense of freneticism, just how much work it took to get over 250 of us here on Sunday for the second time in a row in order to parse things out. And so what's amazing about this moment is that everything is done now. The building is done now. The tent is done now. And it's just sort of standing there. And the Torah says very simply, the first lines of the book of Vayikra, by the way, if you were educated in Cheder in the old world in a traditional way, this is where education starts for young school children. They start from Sefer Vayikra. And the old way of doing it is that you put a drop of honey on the letter Vayikra, and you'd have a child lick it off so that the Torah should be sweet in their mouth. I don't know how you read the Chumash afterwards. But the Torah begins with simple words, a small thing. Vayikra Moshe v'yidaber Hashem elav me'ohel moed. The Holy One called out to Moshe. And you see, by the way, even in the Hebrew, that the aleph of Vayikra, to call out, is a little tiny. It's that way in the Torah too. A friend of mine once had to write a 10-page paper on why that aleph was small. That the Holy One called out to Moses, and God spoke to him from the Ohel Moed, from the tent of meeting, where the ark was, where the two sets of the commandments and the broken and the whole were, where the cherubs were, behind the curtain, where the voice of God came out of. It was Moshe's first time just entering into that holy space. After all that it took to get there. The Exodus and Sinai and the sea splitting, right? The lightning and the thunder and the commandments, the people rebelling and then coming back and then rebelling again, God's anger, the whole thing. This is the first moment that Moshe actually walks in to his place, into the Holy of Holies. After all of that, and the question is, well, what happens next? And if I had my druthers, it would be absolutely nothing. My wish is that Moshe and the Holy sit in companionable silence for a little while. Because I have found in my life that noise and sturm and drum, right, and like beating a drum and yelling at the top of your lungs are the opposite of what it means to be in the connection with something greater than yourself. My hope is in that place is what Moshe had was quiet. I want to talk about the value of that quiet and why it matters. Why it matters more than you might think. Why I think if you find a spiritual leader who has no quiet, who doesn't think of quiet, who doesn't pursue quiet, you should be a little worried about that person. Maybe for that person. Why maybe you need that kind of quiet for yourself, the space to listen and the space to hear. Why the idea of pushing forward, the urge, always the ceaseless urge of the world is actually something that we buy into, but I think works against us. I want to argue for the necessity of that quiet for a second, and what it means to have it in spiritual settings, in moral settings, in world settings, why we need it more than anything else, even though everything around us tells me that we must move right now. I'm so proud of this community, of what we accomplished in the last week, in the last few months, the way that we did come together, the way that we parsed through and chewed through like everybody's different kinds of feedbacks and deep feelings. And I'll tell you, a lot of those notes on the feedback sheets, you know, the huge Post-its, if you were here for that meeting, were written in all caps. There's an Adat Shalom style of writing, and it involves multiple underlines. It's because people feel, and they feel passionately, right? Some people know and feel. There are experts in the room and people who know how it's done and know how it could be done. And they want to tell us about what's going on. And it was like such an interesting experience, right? Where you sort of move from the place of inspiration to the place of perspiration. I'm looking at Jacob, where you're just sort of like parsing through just what people said and beyond the whole thing. And if there was an undertone to the comments that I heard, it would be that. It would be now, right now. What do you mean 9 months from now? What do you mean 12 months from now? We can't wait right now. We can't wait, but we must wait. And it's because, and this is a very complicated thing to say amongst us, we Reconstructionists, because of our understanding of predicate theology and our approach to divinity in general, it's a complicated thing to say, is that I have found, at least for myself, that it's almost always a mistake to go faster than God, than the speed of God. And what I mean by that is I have come to a realization that I should never preach anything to you unless I've heard it first. When I was a younger rabbi, I gave a Yom Kippur sermon on factory farming of chickens. The sermon described in excruciating detail the life situation of these poor chickens. The sermon did not even have the virtue of being short. If you go back to the community, no one ever remembers anything that I said about chickens, but I remember. And I remember one comment that got back on the feedback form afterwards. And when somebody said, your sermon about chickens was a little off the coop. And they were right. It wasn't a good drash. It wasn't a holy teaching. It wasn't a real teaching. Because I wasn't ready to give that kind of a teaching. I was incensed by the issue, but I wasn't ready to give that kind of a teaching. I had not heard for myself with my own integrity. I had not changed my life enough to be able to give that kind of a teaching. I could stand there and point to the issue, but I couldn't point to myself. And that there was no way really for me to be able to sort of speak those words and for people to feel the integrity behind them, because the truth is I just didn't have any. I was trying something on. Something that I hadn't fully inhabited yet. Did I want to inhabit it? Did I believe that it was right? Sure. But was I ready? No. Some of you are still quoting to me the Devar Torah that I gave on Yom Kippur, the one about the difference between moral outrage and moral vision. And I'm always gratified when a few months later I hear someone say, do you remember that thing you said on Yom Kippur? Because it feels as like a sign to me that I hit something right. I chanced upon something real. And I think the reason is, one of the things I want to tell you is that when I teach to you, I don't say it unless I've heard it first. And really, I'm just trying to pass along the message as best as I can. You know, sometimes I think that we get to a place where people want their spiritual leaders to be a bit of a jukebox. Rabbi, play the administration's weaponization of the fight against anti-Semitism now. D6, you know. And I get where it comes from, because really the relationship between a rabbi and a community, there's a lot about hearing your most heartfelt beliefs come from the voice of whoever is darshaning that day, right? It's not just that the person is coming up. It's really like the relationship is an organic one in which it's actually very, very important not to teach as a teacher what you think is right, but what you hear that your community needs. You know, I think I've sort of said this to you before. And the thing is, there's a lot of stuff that I've heard people say, I think, to spiritual leaders, I want you to say this thing. Why haven't you said this thing? We need to say this thing right now. And every time I do it, I'm always like, that was a mistake. Because I don't have integrity around it yet. I haven't heard the voice of the divine whispering it to me. And one of the things that I found most important in a spiritual life is silence and the space to listen to the God of your understanding. This is from Thomas Merton. People know who Thomas Merton is? He was a trailblazer. He was a monk, an American monk, sort of a trailblazing spiritual figure in the United States. A lot of people who are at the heart of community activism and like a fully realized life quote Merton. What was the name of the book with the mountains that he wrote? The 7-story mountain, the something mountain? Anybody? 7-story mountain, something along those lines? Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful writer, powerful religious thinker. Here's what he says. There is a pervasive form of modern violence to which the idealist most easily succumbs: activism and overwork. The rush and pressure of modern life are a form, perhaps the most common form of its innate violence. To allow oneself to be carried away from a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want help everyone and everything is to succumb to violence. The frenzy of the activist neutralizes his or her work. It destroys the fruitfulness of her work because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes work fruitful. This is Parker Palmer, by the way, the famous activist and Quaker teacher, commenting on this. I first read this passage in 1970 when I was caught up in the frenzy of working as a community organizer in Washington, D.C. To this day, I reread them often because they remind me to ask myself a critical question that I too easily forget. What do I need right now to tend to the root of inner wisdom that makes work fruitful? I would like this community to embrace its moments of silence. I'm asking you to. I want to recommend that our tempo, that our pattern, be a kind of full tide and ebb tide. A push forward into what it is that we think is most important, and then also a retreat so that we can listen to the quiet of God and hear what it's whispering to us, so that we move not just at the right speed, not so that we just don't do anything when things are wrong, but that we do the right thing when things are wrong. And it's a big difference. If you want to light a light in the dark, first you have to know where the candles are. And I think it takes a measure of doing to be able just to sort of wait and be until inspiration comes to you. I'm imagining, by the way, right now that this is a challenge in teaching. I don't know, maybe you're fully agreed, maybe you're fully on board with it. But especially in the moment, I think that there is that sense of how come we can't do that thing right now? It's needed. We can't wait. But I'm telling you, at the same time, we both can't wait and we must wait. Because pushing ourselves into spaces that we're not sort of ready for yet, where we don't fully have integrity yet, where we haven't been filled with the Holy Spirit yet, where there's not sort of a whisper for us that allows us to connect to something wider yet, it leads us astray. Many of you know Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. So this teaching that I'm about to share for you was by another Abraham Joshua Heschel. You may not realize this, but Heschel was actually meant to be the next Apter Rebbe. There's a Hasidic dynasty of Apt, and they're all, by the way, named Abraham Joshua Heschel, more or less, some version along those lines. And he was actually in line to become the next person, and you know him, you love him because of his activism. But this is what, I think it's his grandfather or his great-grandfather, I didn't quite get the lineage down before Shabbos came in, but this is what he has to say about this. He says, if you really want to be in full service, what you shouldn't do is ascend another level, take another step up the ladder until you're called to do so. From heaven, he says. Al zeki hu tzorech olam, right? Until you fully realize that this is what the world needs. He says, what we see is Hasidim running around and acting crazy. Apparently Jews acting crazy was a problem even back then. And he says in particular what he saw were Hasidim who were consumed with apparently depression. They had deep depression. And he says it is not possible, chaz v'shalom, God forbid, that this dark feeling that they all have comes from Torah. Because Torah at its root, like Rabbi Strassfeld was teaching us last night, is misameach et halev. Torah is meant to gladden your heart. And so if you see someone in a deep depression around Torah, it means that something's wrong. And he says, it's because they have tried to ascend levels that the Holy One has not yet called them to, and they are in the wrong place. He quotes a very beautiful teaching, by the way, from Parshat Mishpatim, that basically says, when you come to my altar, don't make stairs for it. Madriga, it's a complicated thing. Okay, forget it. You know what, this one isn't going to work as well out loud as it is in my head, but I can explain to you afterwards what he's trying to say. Classic sermon mistake 101. Shh. What would your father have thought of me in this moment? It's terrible.
I know what the verse says. That's why.
You know, very right. But the Apter says you have to be careful of this. He says if you truly want to be in service, if you want to be an Eved Hashem, if you'll be in service of the Holy One, or even in service of the whole world, wait till called. And I know that sounds totally counterinstinctual. But what I have seen is people rush into the breach, their mouths full of vigor, their hearts full of purpose. And I have seen the way that even the best of us have made mistakes in terms of what we have called for, what we have protested against, what we have advocated for, that we only realize years later our hearts were in the right place, and yet sometimes people still got hurt. And so I say to you, really from one of the deepest places in me, that this part of the Torah, Vayikra, a small thing that I'm making into a large thing, which is essentially a rabbinic job description, that God first called to Moses before Moses stepped into the breach to preach the Torah, is absolutely vital. You have to make space for yourself to listen, not just for the title sentence of the cause that you fight for, of the thing that you're passionate about, of the change that you want to be in the world, but all the codicils and paragraphs. You have to find the thing that you can say, this is what it should be, and to have it ring like a bell. To feel it in your feet, in your spine, in your belly, and your heart. Not just in your anger and in your brain and in your mouth. Truly, to listen is part of making the world a more just place. And so I, for a moment, in this moment, will take a moment of spiritual repose. With Moshe, I find that this is a blessing. In certain ways, it's nice that it's a quiet Shabbat, even though our people are going and doing incredible work out there in the world. For in the quiet, I feel like I can finally hear the voice of Torah. And without hearing it, how can I share it with you? Shabbat Shalom.